Hey, we are live. Welcome back, Robyn. It's been too long.
Hello.
So happy to have you back with us today, and we're gonna leap into some you'd written, I think yesterday about the biggest scandal in Washington, which was Kamala Harris speaking with a Natasha
Mm.
Badanov accent or something. Or
Well, it was not a French accent. Like I took a couple of years of French. I've been to France. Um, I know what a French accent sounds like. Big fan of Edith Piaf. Um, that was not a French accent. Also, if she was trying to speak a little bit of French as what's his face, that judge rule over at Fox News, um, Ari Fleischer said like she was like trying to do. I think it was Ari Fleischer. She was like,
Mhm.
well, she was trying to do a little bit of a speak French a little bit. No, that's not what. Like the French would be le plan, not the plan. I don't.
Yes, they have a different word for the.
Yes,
And
they
even in
don't.
French accents, like on TV shows where someone is like the French character, but it's really like you or me playing like
Yeah,
oh Lee. That's sort of they always say le or still say
yeah.
that. It's like one of
Well,
those things
like
that oh
the
he's
French.
French.
I feel like the French lady that I used to work with was always didn't say the all the time either when she was speaking English. Like I don't
Yeah.
recall that being a thing.
Yeah, it's sort of we've discussed it's sort of the Hillaryization of Kamala Harris. And I think I'm a fan of hers. I would have voted for her in the primary had that been an option. I usually, because I living in at the time, if you live in Oregon, you sort of it's usually you get a nominee at that point. It's like okay, well,
Yeah,
we've decided a nominee without you, but I
which
like
is stupid. I'm sorry, but we need to stop that just in general.
yes, the national everyone votes on the same day.
Like, it doesn't make sense. It's like, well, these states are really special and they get to choose, and then everyone else can go fuck themselves. I don't.
Yeah,
That
I
does
mean,
not actually make any sense.
and the argument against it is somehow that they can't do as if like technology, like they're all getting places on a horse instead of like, well, they could probably
Yeah,
do a national campaign for the 18 years that these
I mean,
primaries
but
go on,
frankly,
and
I
they're
think that
on
they should.
television.
Yeah, I think that they should stop doing the tours entirely. Like, for the most part, anyone who is actually literally going to go and see a presidential candidate speak, which is not me at any point ever. I did see Ralph Nader speak, but that was just like a regular dude speaking at a college thing. But like, yeah, I'm anyone who's going to actually bother to go has probably a television set and a computer, and that's how they found out about those candidates to begin with. So like, I don't
Yes,
really.
yes.
It wastes so much money, and they have to spend so like, it's a weird, gross, disgusting waste of money. Frankly,
Well,
like,
and it's a rock star thing. So a lot of mainstream Democrats aren't will be the first to say these rallies don't mean anything, usually in regards
mhm.
to Warren or Sanders and then Trump. So it would seem to be like, well, what it's, I mean, it's a rock star thing, sure, and that's cool, but you know, um, yeah, I mean, it's sort of like when they're eating the corn dogs in
Yeah.
Iowa and at the state fair. It's like if you're eating a corn, you've been in that state too long. It's kind of like
I have
when you've
never
been
had a corn.
to place, you're in the town like one day too, like one day past what was kind of relevant for you to get everything in port. Well, I hit the museums, I hit the aquarium.
Yeah.
Now I'm getting a corn dog. I think maybe I'm just very bored and I've maxed out this town, and it's just sort of this ridiculous like, why are you getting a corn dog? And
Well,
especially
to
in
prove that they're like American and can stop. I don't know. Have you ever
here's
had
the
a corn dog?
fried or fried. I've had a corn dog.
I have.
The fried like
Yeah.
pork chop. I have not done.
I didn't even know that was a thing. No, I've never had a corn dog, but I'm a very big fan of the little like hot dogs from Trader Joe's.
Hmm.
Those are delicious with like the garlic mustard and whatnot. I've never had a corn dog though.
Yes.
Um, and although I will say one of my life's ambitions is to go to the Minnesota State Fair with my friend Brandy, who lives there, you know Brandy from Twitter, I imagine, and go to the Minnesota State Fair and see the llama costume contest, which we fiercely celebrate every year. And I've been informed that the Minnesota State Fair is superior to the Iowa State Fair, and I believe it.
Yeah.
Because I don't know anyone who's actually been to the Iowa State Fair.
And for those who tuned in, I think we're doing food tubing. We will do food tubing at some point. But the original point
my
about
ADD has been on overdrive, like.
But as you were saying about Kamala Harris, I mean, part of this attack upon her, and it gets called out, and I know her supporters feel strongly about it, who still diehard supporters. But on the other hand, and I've gotten some pushback on this, but to me, it's like, from an objective standpoint, if popularity was fair, I would have already been announced as the next James Bond, but that's not how life works. So right now, it just very much seems to me that, and I think we've discussed this, like, it seems like your strong coalition, you either have the left really adores you, or, Black voters, especially in a Democratic primary, the media digs you. I mean, the media love Obama, and I feel like that was even Saturday Night Live made fun of it, about how the media fawned over Obama compared to Hillary. And he was actually, before he became sort of persona non grata amongst white moderates specifically, or whatever, he was like, they certainly adored him more than Hillary Clinton, and he was seen as, which is a farce, as this post-partisan potential without her baggage. Chris Matthews, raved over him. So that tends to be a pattern, and it's like
no, this is not against Obama or whatever, but the Chris Matthews, I forget what it was. It was the most insipid sentence I've ever heard in my entire life. And I can't remember what it is, and that's going to bother me.
Related to Obama, or I mean, I think he, but yes, I mean,
was it the garbage taking up when?
Oh yes,
it was when Obama speaks, men hear something, and then when Hillary speaks, men hear take out the garbage. And I'm
yes,
oh no.
I recall that, and
I think it was him, but
well, it could have been anyone from Morning Joe. I mean, that's the problem. The misogyny we saw with Warren and the others. Problem is, like, that's the inherent Democratic challenge, and I think you've made that, which is just like, okay, well, we need to fix sexism and racism, and then everything will be fair. And it's like, well, I don't think we have to win not saying we need to toss these groups out of the bus, but just we can't correct for how certain people are processed, because ultimately it's
my view is that what you have to actually do is make it more difficult.
Yeah. So I don't, I mean, right now with Harris, she's in a position of, she certainly has, Black voter support as the first, plus in general, she was very well liked, but the left is not particularly very fond of her. I remember one of the first really nasty emails I got from Wonkette was I wrote something positive about her. It was surprising, because it was like, sometimes I go in thinking, hey, I'm going to get feedback on this. But this one was like,
I felt like the commenters were primarily Kamala.
This was very early on, and I don't think it was specifically Wonkette commenters so much as like the public at large.
Yeah.
Getting a lot of feedback from the left. And it had, in that weird way where something like, oh, I didn't know you even read my stuff, but suddenly some folks were like, oh yeah, I really dislike her. Fine. But then there's the sense of the media. I don't know candidates who the media views the way they view Kamala Harris. Like, I don't see examples of that. And people are like, well, what about Trump? It's like, I feel like, look at Maggie Haberman, look at others. They go out of their way to normalize Trump. Or if Trump had spoke, he could literally have spoken like Pepe Le Pew, and it would be like, what an interesting way that he did that. And anyone who suggests otherwise and are insulting the common man who isn't on his third wife and lives in a penthouse, they are, insulting. That was sort of the thing. But here it's just really, hard to get similar, like Hillary never kind of got away from how she had been presented, how the media packaged her, and
Mhm.
similarly to Kamala. So it's interesting. Right before we got on, there was something someone had mentioned, the big rivalry, and this will probably excite you, Robyn, in 2024 if um, if Biden does not run for re-election, would be that it's either between Buttigieg or Harris. Um, and
Sorry, I really
yes, exactly. As I said, that would I'm sure that was that's
know
a
that.
potent choice for you. But the I look at that as, and again, I would have voted for Harris over Buttigieg, but I look at him as a guy who the media adores, and another group I should have
Mhm,
mentioned earlier, never Trumpers adore. Now Democrats often talk about how the progressives are the bad guys coming over, taking over the party, without
mhm.
noticing how a big contingent of white moderates, specifically never Trumpers, former Republicans, are not even just part of the Democratic coalition now, but they are very vocal. They're the ones who write the kind of
And very much leading it, I would say, to some degree,
oh yeah.
almost.
What are your thoughts on that?
I
How
mean, I think that people are like, you know, I feel like we've been through many years of other sites, not us,
Mhm.
doing the whole like, we found a Republican who said a mean thing about Trump, um, like rubric and everything. And it came to be like this sort of like, I don't, not idolization or something, but like, oh, they're so wonderful and great and pure because they, are the good Republicans who buck their party because of Trump. And like, yes, everyone should hate him. He is a terrible human being. But I think that, there's also that like, oh, they're so classy.
Oh
They're
yeah.
so normal. We love that, and they think that you know, like they love the Lincoln Project dudes and Rick Wilson, who I think is
Mhm.
not a very good person, but it's just this very like, yay, they're on our
Oh,
side and it's the
and
cool people and they're talking to us now.
absolutely.
We don't
And
have to
those
associate with the band geeks.
absolutely. And those guys, especially Tom Nichols and Wilson, you read their stuff, there's a consistent pattern, which is, I mean, and obviously you could just say, obviously they don't like the far left, they wouldn't like AOC, or they wouldn't like, but they tend to not like women of color, people of
Yeah.
color.
Oh no.
So Cory Booker's an idiot. Um, uh, um, Obviously, they don't like Hillary Clinton very much. Gillibrand's a lighthead. They clearly
Mhm.
who they like, who they put forward, tend to be, and that might be political sense, Spangenberger, but they adore Buttigieg. He's very smart. He's very bright.
Yeah.
And one of them, like just
We speak so many languages,
yes, and he could have.
like we all do.
Yes, well, I mean, he's on paper as has the same credentials as say Julian Castro, but these guys, their
Mhm.
reaction to him is very different. So what that does is create a narrative that these white moderates who are so important, because they're, when we win elections, they're why we win elections. If we lose
Yeah.
elections, it's because people like you and me didn't come out. So if
Mhm.
it's like, wait a minute, in 2000, in 2004, in 2016, you guys tried to get these good, sensible country club Republicans, and they still voted for the
Mhm.
people who lower their taxes. And it's like, maybe that's a bad strategy. It's like, oh, no, no, no. What happened was that the people we ignored during the campaign, Black voters and liberals of all races, didn't show up in sufficient numbers, and you guys suck. And you're why the Tea Party happened. And I tend to think
Yeah.
that's bad a bad strategy, but I don't. What do I know?
It's
But
very high school, I feel. Like it's very high school.
very high
Like,
doesn't like. Why are you blaming? Like, look, if you don't think I'm going to help you win, fine, but don't blame me when you lost. When you're saying, well, we've got the good billionaire Bloomberg.
yeah.
He's at our.
Well,
Oh no,
yeah.
that didn't work. It's like, all right, sorry, but those guys really have, they're the ones on Morning Joe and MSNBC, and
Mhm.
that sense, that perception is that the white moderates who decide elections, the swing voters, the indies, Buttigieg is someone who can swing it, or Klobuchar, but obviously not Harris, because those guys think they talk about how everything she does is terrible, and
The thing I find, yeah.
so where is her And, you know, I don't necessarily agree with the argument that Black voters embraced Biden because they were scared of Trump. I think there's some of that, but for people I spoke to, they genuinely like the guy, both from his time as in the Senate and then, of course, with Obama. So I don't think that's entirely it. But if anyone believes that was a motivating factor,
Then
clearly,
why wouldn't it be a motivating factor for everyone?
yes. Well, then they
Like,
kind of, that would be sort of implying that there is such a thing as systemic racism and that Black people
yes.
might have more reason to be afraid of Republican administrations
Yeah.
than white
Well, that would
moderates.
just be silly. No.
Yes, because again, if you feel like, oh, I just not inclined to vote for this Republican light Democrat, so I'm not going to
Yeah.
vote. Fine, I could be in the bluest state ever. They will link that to, oh, obviously you want all this terrible stuff to happen to minorities or whatever. But what about, okay, well, the swing voters who would have then turned and stayed home or even voted for
Mhm.
Trump over Sanders or Warren, that is a choice they are free to make. They are not sociopaths. They're allowed to make that choice,
Yeah.
but you're a spoiled brat if you were to not vote for, even if you didn't literally vote for Trump, just staying at home is essentially being because your vote is inclined. So again, it's a bad strategy, but I mean, I think, yeah, I mean, I would presume, and this goes back to sort of the terrible polling that Biden's getting and the potential route we're getting in 2022, that, you know, there would be pressure on, well, the safer candidate would be someone like Buttigieg. And I think that might incline as to why some Republicans are even starting to like stop their love affair with him and go after him a bit. I mean, you saw that with Tom Cotton and others, because they potentially perhaps view him as more of a threat than Harris. But I don't know.
Mhm.
And what are your think of her potential if Biden does not run in 2024?
I mean, obviously, I would prefer like I don't hmm, like I don't. I mean, I think it's like I'm so terrified of the K Hive. Honestly, like I like I didn't have a problem. It's like, weird. Like I didn't have a problem with her at all before, and then like people were really mean to me, and I was like, which is like a stupid thing, but it's like I almost like sort of tuned her out because I didn't want to pay any attention to the meanness. And so I haven't really, quite frankly, paid very much attention to her since that was a whole thing. Um, but I don't know. I mean, I don't know what her chances are right now. I think that like like I've said before, I really do think like, she had a huge lead in the beginning. Not in the beginning, but like before Biden announced.
Hmm.
Like it was hers to lose unless he announced, I think. Is what the narrative was. And I think like once that sort of happened, she stumbled a little bit and the media stopped paying as much attention to her and then started paying attention to Biden. And I think that was, in the primary, a very difficult bump for her to get over. And I do think that if she's going to run, she should probably she should start now and, be seen out there doing things. And I think that's what she was trying to do with the France trip. And then, the Republicans were like, she spoke in a French accent, which she didn't. And so what if she did?
Yeah, what
Like, really, I don't care. Like I said, I'm a natural mimic. It is really difficult for me to not copy other people's, like who I'm talking to's mannerisms and like speech. But, you know,
it seems empathetic. It seems a normal human instinct. It's not necessarily a terrible thing. I mean, I think they went after Gillibrand as calculating. I mean, very misogynistic coded terms. I mean, not
oh,
coded
yeah.
because
Well, the
she,
assumption is always that women are calculating.
yes, everything they kind of do and whatever, there's some ulterior motive. Um,
Mhm.
and I guess it's interesting also about 2024, because it's controversial to acknowledge that Biden's immortal and that there's a chance that he might not run in
Mhm.
2024. But if he were not to, It's interesting. I don't know, who do you think would be, because there's been set up, at least in 2016, this sort of left and center, whatever schism between the party, or even say establishment or non-establishment, whatever you define that, that was represented by Sanders and then Sanders Warren. Who would that be in 2024? I'm not sure it would be
Yeah,
Cortez yet. I think she'd. I'm not actually blanking on her age. I think she'd be
I know.
legally,
I'm not sure if she's old enough yet.
but I don't know who that would be, and so would it sort of kind of just be kind
I
of a
mean,
bunch
I love
of,
Pramila Jayapal. I'm probably pronouncing her name wrong because I don't ever listen to news. Um, I just read it.
you just see?
I think she's amazing and would be a fantastic choice because she's like, at least like very super passionate and very clear about what she wants and what she wants to do and what she wants to see happen, which I think that Kamala votes for the right things. I think that, a lot of the time she says the right things. I think a lot of the time she's not really good at, or not, she needs to bring a little bit more of her lawyer, I guess, into things and like really like explain to people. People love shit being explained to them, and really like passionately advocating for things because she did do that pretty well in the Senate a lot. That would be, I think, a better move for her than the usual vice president shtick.
Yes, and again, to allude to Chicago the musical, it is all showbiz, right? Like it is. People feel like it's and I think that's something attention Democrats struggle with, is that you know Hillary Clinton has this great resume, so she's the
Mhm.
most qualified for the job, as if it is a bunch of people in a room making an informed choice rather than the American public. And
Yeah.
we don't want to admit that, but a lot of it is like, who do I like? And I think that was something of where, you know, they'll accuse anyone of socialism or
Hmm.
communism. To me, it's like I think
Oh
there
yeah.
were people in middle America who just saw, who are, for obviously reasons, more scared of Ilhan Omar than there would be Bernie Sanders. You could show them everything on the list. You could find
Hmm.
a white guy, John Fetterman, we one example, who presents as a guy at the bar, even though everything he might vote on would be aligned with AOC. An average, say, swing voter isn't going to be like, oh, this guy's going to do all this crazy. It's and
Oh yeah.
not
Because well,
necessarily
here's
giving
the thing:
racism or sexism. Is just that people aren't making informed choices.
people
They're
are also used to giving white men a lot more leeway than everyone else. Like with
also
like hypothetically, if Trump had, someone thought Trump did a fake Trump French accent, it'd be like, oh God, why are you getting on him? He just slipped or something. That's whatever. It's nothing. And if a woman does it, it's like, what is she up to? What is her game? Is she just going to be like, take up miming and become Marcel Marceau or whatever, put a beret on, start singing songs from Gigi? Like, what is going to happen here? It can't just be like, oh, someone used the word the as the, instead of the,
Mhm.
because it's French. I've heard it both ways.
Exactly. I think it's the part of it is the popularity. So
Mhm.
with that structure, it's like, as I said, Marjorie Green could win because she's very, as much as we hate her, she's very popular. It's kind of like people who are sort of, and I was saying this about all Democrats, but sometimes I encounter people who, it's like someone is like, yeah, that was never funny or that was never popular. And it's like, well, no, I would, not that I think that things are objectively funny or popular, but I
Mhm.
might not like that movie, but it made 500 gazillion dollars less.
Yeah.
So I think it is popular. Lots of people liked it. I did
Hmm.
not. Um, if this comedy, if people saw this, yes, like it's Pat. I did not particularly, a lot of people do not forget, and I think a lot of people want to say that after the fact. I never found that
Yeah.
funny. I never liked the Spice Girls. It's like, well, someone was
Oh, I
creating,
totally liked. I hated the Spice Girls, and then I loved the Spice Girls.
I
But
always love the Spice Girls. I had a creepy when I lived in New York. A friend of mine was studying abroad in the in London, and she came back. She had a Spice Girls poster, and I had it in my
mhm.
apartment. And really weird guy was would come in once a month to do sort of the exterminating. He would come and he would always be like, "Ooh, Spice Girls, hot, yum," and it was like really awkward. Yum, and it was like, okay, well,
No, that's like the worst thing anyone can say. No, that's
yes,
terrible and wrong and bad. Even about food, I don't like it.
it was a very it's yes, it was just it still sticks with me. That's like almost 25 years ago. And
That is really upsetting.
literally every month he came and he would see the photo. And I was like, I want to take this down. So it's like maybe I should take it down before he comes. So he wasn't. And then like about a couple years later, when they're on their way out, he comes in, he's like,
Mhm.
Spice Girls. Mm, still hot, but nothing lasts forever. And then it's like, well, I suppose that is true. Like things
I
fall.
mean, they all still look pretty good. And
I
I
find
will
that.
say, Sporty Spice was excellent in Blood Brothers.
Yeah, yes, I
She was the
tried.
mother. Really did a fantastic job, I thought, is my take on the Spice Girls.
Yes,
Um,
they are popular. So I feel like the idea is that certain things are popular and fair or not. And if you do not like them, they are still popular.
mhm.
So I feel like it's important to recognize that Marjorie Taylor Greene is popular amongst a significant part of the Republican base. And Republicans have shown that they don't they kind of are afraid of their base or they cater to their base more. So
Yeah,
it's very possible that she will.
absolutely. And
Whereas
I
I
will say,
feel like
here's,
amongst other people, they're very afraid of like Nancy
yeah,
Mace or Nikki Haley of like their idea of
no,
right Republican. Like you'd written about this. You could speak to this a bit about how it's like Democrats are always like the one to worry about is Jeb or Romney or McCain, like all these folks
yeah,
who they never recognize like, well, Bush is an idiot or Trump's an idiot. They could never win, but oh my God, we have to really be
it's
worried about
always the people they think could never win, and it's never the people they think are like, oh my God, that's a terrible threat. Um, like I will say, Republicans do not like Nikki Haley. Like Democrats think that Republicans love Nikki Haley and think that she is just like the absolute best. But like even Republicans will be like, she can say these things that we know she doesn't believe them because she's a rhino.
Mhm.
No, she's not like I do not think she has a chance. Like she, no matter how much she tries, like even like Trump said about her, like, well, she'll criticize me and then uncriticize me and then criticize me again. And I was like, that's yes, that is what she does. Like depending on, you know, which way the wind seems to be blowing. And they don't like that. And the thing is, people in general don't actually like that. Like that is a human thing to be a little skeeved out by, I think. You know.
I mean, Marjorie
Um,
Green is inherently, she appears loyal and internally consistent. She's
mhm.
terrible, but like dramatically, that is the character who
Oh yeah.
turns out to be more faithful to you than the Nikki Haley character who
Mhm.
stab you in the back to
Yeah.
get what they want, or at least Stefanik or all these others. I mean, I think it's very fascinating because, and something I'm writing about for tomorrow is this ongoing fear. So, you can't even like, oh, you're not even allowed to be like, oh my God, I'm so annoyed of Manchin or I'm so annoyed of Cinema. Because it's like, they'll switch parties. And whenever
Yeah.
someone says that, I'm like, well, where have you been? Like, like you understand the Republican Party, whatever they don't, the extent that they believe, it's almost like there's an actual, oh, she'll go
Mhm.
join that respectable party that Mitt Romney belongs to. It's like, well, no, you understand that.
That party hates Mitt Romney,
Yes.
hates him so
And
much. Like,
like everything she's been about, same with Manchin, has been bipartisanship,
mhm.
that bipartisan infrastructure bill, which Taylor Greene has like painted targets on the back of the 13 disloyal Republicans. She's so
Oh
crazy.
yeah.
She's like 6 brave Democrats, that's the squad, voted
Mhm.
against it. It's like, well, the
Um,
squad but you just said they're communists, and now it's a communist bill. Maybe it's not
Mhm.
communist because the communists didn't vote for it, which is something that communists might do if it was a. I'm just confused, Marjorie. Help
Yeah.
me understand where you're coming from. But anyway, it's just like, and like Republicans, like, we're getting death threats. Please stop it. And Marjorie Greene's like, no, more.
Yeah, if
This
they were
from a
Republicans,
lesson
they
or
would get
whatever.
beat instantly by someone wackier. Like
Like the
they
idea
have
either of
no
them just switch,
chance.
like either of them would switch parties. It'd be like a gangster movie. They'd be like, "Thank you," and they
Yeah.
get shot in the head or something.
Yeah.
Or the idea they'd be greeted with like a casserole or something, where literally the party is showing itself. So to me, it's like, come on, guys, fellow Democrats, just
Mhm.
be like, yeah, I'm gonna talk smack about you. Where are you gonna go, Joe? Where are you gonna go,
Yeah.
Kirsten? To those guys? I mean, now
Yeah.
they're like, oh, those terrible leftists followed her in the bathroom, and it's like, do you see? But they laughed at psychopaths threatening Mitt Romney in an airport or
Mhm.
whatever, or trying to run people off the road. Like, clearly, you will get over this party, and you will everything you've done from voting to
Yeah.
impeach Trump twice, and like no one's, and they're never going to trust you. So we have some control in this situation because
Yeah.
Kirsten's only
And
career
this is the
is with
thing.
us.
No one respects people who are like mushy. And like they just don't. And being like, "Oh no, Kirsten Cinema and Joe Manchin won't be our friends if we don't like do everything that they say and obey it, their every word." No one finds that attractive. That's like being Smithers. Like, like,
Please, sir.
and I'm sorry. One thing that I keep wanting to point out is that the only people to whom extreme normalcy is attractive are like professional pundits. Everyone else likes weird shit. Everyone else is weird as fuck. The weirder you are, the better chance you have at like almost anything. Like even Joe Biden is a little bit weird. Like he has his weird moments,
And
so he's a
and he's
little
got
bit
it.
of a character. Like he's
And
not.
that got him through, like his quirkiness in
Yeah.
a weird way. Then people's like, oh, he's too touchy. I think that's why it hurt Cunningham, because if you're
Mhm.
present yourself as this sort of very upstanding, normal guy,
Mhm.
anything weird becomes, oh my God, maybe everything, it like starts to crack. Whereas like, I feel like a weirder person, almost like to the Biden guy, if you found out he was sitting sex, you'd be like, oh, okay. Almost to Clinton. Clinton felt like a guy you're kind of, oh, that
Clinton was weird.
rascal. Because he's, of
For the
course,
time, Clinton was weird. He was like, oh my God, he played his saxophone on David Letterman or Jay Leno, one of the two. And that's just crazy. And people actually like that. And I think one thing I will say about Kamala that I am just thinking about now, she is super normal. Like she is very like, here is what we do. And I'm a super normal person. And she's got a, like, if she wants to run, she has to let her freak flag fly a little bit. Like,
yeah,
or
because
else people don't
Republicans
pay
seize on
attention.
that. Whenever she does something weird, they seize on it as being calculating or odd, similar to like Hillary with the hot sauce
Yeah.
or
But like, this is the thing. The problem with Democrats is that when people do that, they go, oh no, we better back off. Like, oh no, Howard Dean laughed weird. Like, we better back off. Oh no, we better start acting normal. People are going to think we're weird, instead of just being like, just completely freaking owning it. Like, I would absolutely, she didn't speak in a French accent, but if she did, she'd be like, yes, I do this all the time. It's super embarrassing. I wish I did not do that. Because like I said, I do that. It is absolute torture for me to talk to a person with an Irish brogue and not speak back in an Irish brogue myself. Like, it is painful.
And
Like,
you'd
I
mentioned,
want to do it so badly.
oh, big or yes, who can't, like, you can't resist. And it's just sort
Yeah.
of just being, it's funny, like, again, the people who are like, that's so, don't be anti woke, or don't be all the uber
Yeah.
wokeness, are attacking her for potentially, you know, insulting the noble French language by slightly. It's all disingenuous. But something last week, David, I discussed, and I went to you, of like with Abigail Spanberger had the statement of like the most defeatist statement impossible of like, no one we elected Biden to be normal, not
Mhm.
FDR. Which, aside from the fact that FDR was not able to get us out of a crisis by being
Yeah.
normal, like probably very normal people who could not have risen to that occasion. But feedback I got from someone was like, well, obviously she's talking about the fact that FDR cut black people out of, um, you know, the New Deal and knocked up the Japanese. It's like I don't think Abigail Spanberger, who's very much we're too woke to win, it's like because that's the argument that Republicans claim, like, oh well, first you go after those Confederate
Yeah.
monuments, you want to get rid of Robert E. Lee, but then you're going to go after the nice, you know, white guys who just because they own slaves but weren't traitors, and there's a slippery slope. So obviously clearly, and it's like one of the most disingenuous arguments I've ever
Oh,
seen.
absolutely.
Obviously,
Well, that's the thing.
she's
People
not
don't just want to say, I don't like
well,
social programs. Like, just say, I don't like social programs. I don't want, like, I believe in, you know, not helping people at all, but also being super woke. Like, that is what I want. And I think that's what a lot of people want. So they might as well just say it instead of being like, oh, it's not exactly right. The right person isn't presenting it, blah, blah, blah. Like, just say, no, thank you. I would like my taxes to be low.
it's just
Like,
and it's a rant. It's such a
I
weird,
care more about me.
and it's a weird spiral, right? Because for a while, most Democrats, most Americans, rightly adored FDR. He was a great hero for it, you know, getting through the Depression, World War II, all this sort of stuff. And then I honestly, again, hardly a burner, but I just
Yeah.
noticed patterns. Sanders apparently committed the heresy of only really alluding to FDR as a former Democratic president he liked, like instead of like paying tribute to say Bill Clinton or you know even Obama, he would talk about FDR because he was alive during the time. But I'm bummed. But no, he was like, but he's referencing FDR.
That a lie.
And suddenly, suddenly you got these folks saying, "Oh well, here's what FDR he locked up, you know, the Japanese, and here's how he was racist." All of that's true, but that's critical.
Literally not what he was talking about in that particular instance.
Obviously, like, so it suddenly became a very thing for moderate or centrist Dems to then distance themselves from one of the greatest presidents of the 20th century.
Yeah, and so now they have to hate him
because because of what that, and then I was like, oh well, do you like Jefferson, who literally owned people? That's different. Or what about like pretty much all, well, this is different, again, fundamentally disingenuous, especially when you say that in your same mouth of defending Spanberger, who would be the first to be like, oh, we need to avoid any social justice argument or any sort of thing like that. It's just really, no, this was basically like the please don't hurt me position, which is while we were talking, CNN came back with an article about inside the dysfunctional first few days, the Kamala Harris presidency.
Jesus Christ.
So it's just like, I mean,
I'm sorry.
The reviews are bad, but it's like, I don't look, it's no, you put everything into a play or a film and whatever, and it's like the reviews are bad. Like maybe Kamala Harris, it'll be like Rocky Horror, where it comes back and everyone realize what a cult favorite, or like Fight Club, everyone loves it, but like no, like during the time, like the executive who greenlighted Fight Club got fired because it didn't do as well. It's like right now it just seems like the reviews are very
and now people are like, Fight Club, maybe the messaging there the correct messaging there did not actually come through. Because people very much seem to have taken the wrong lesson from that movie.
Well, and the movie became even more, to suddenly verve into, again, film theory, but it became more didactic than the book. So the movie was very clearly Brad Pitt, he's gorgeous, but Brad Pitt, yes, he's gorgeous, but listen, understand clearly, he is a bad guy, but he's so gorgeous and he's dressed cool. And yes, look, I had that leather jacket, fortunately pre-Instagram, so no one has any evidence. Much like there was
my God, Steven.
There's one Halloween where it was like one of the dancers from Chicago. I had imitated their outfit, and that was me for Halloween. pre-Facebook, pre-Instagram, pre-iPhone. I can deny it to my dying day. My friends are like, well, didn't you? No, because you have no proof. You have no
I know.
evidence.
I'm so glad that I have some things I can deny. Like I really am. Like, oh man, I would have embarrassed the shit out of myself as a child if I had had access to TikTok or anything. I'm so glad. Like, it could have been really not good. It would have just been like, here's my channel where I just sing all of Liza Minnelli's greatest hits.
Yes, exactly.
And people would be like, oh no, we hate you. Please, like, die in a fire. I don't know.
Oh,
But
someone had just asked April Kurtz, I'm curious, why is Brad Pitt a bad guy? I don't think Brad Pitt is a bad guy. I was referring to the character in the movie he played, Tyler Durden.
Tyler Durden.
Very clear in the movie that he is a bad guy. The book is much more complicated. The film, being a film, is very clear. He's a bad guy. Edward Norton, the hero, defeats the bad guy and then holds hands with Helena Bonham Carter, or and that's supposed to be, don't do what he was doing as when he thought he was Tyler Durden, Brad Pitt. It was very clear. And then people are having underground fight clubs. And I was like, well, I don't understand. It was very clear not to have underground.
This was not good.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like certain films very much have
people take the wrong message from a lot of shit. The incels love American Psycho. They're like, clearly this, like, all of them, they got like that dude as their avatar and everything. They're like, this guy, he knows what's up and is also a creepy ass murderer. Like, there were so many men who were like, yes, American Psycho, that is what I want to be. Let me go get some business cards.
Yeah, and that's an interesting flip example. I'm glad you brought that up because I think the book is less it is less clear that there's, but the film, because I think a woman wrote it, it might have even directed it, and I think it's very clearly an attack on toxic masculinity and what film, and instead, but that again, people, and you have no control over that. I think more it's just like artistically, it's clear that they are not advocating for this, and if someone's going to like then decide to kill the president because they saw something, it's like, well, that's not really the message. What can you do? But yeah, it's a strange sense of, people are drawn to these things. I feel like, Fight Club's a good example of this person who's very toxic, has a toxic male fan base. I think what can be learned from that, and I think you've written a lot about this, about men of a certain age being drawn to something and going towards it, and Republicans, which have been for ages the party of old people, decided like, well, maybe we should be the party of old people and and not listen to young people. And instead, Republicans really have the youth movement. Like, if you were to think of like who can raise an army of young, dangerous people, Marjorie Green, Lauren Boebert, Matt Gaetz, it's like scary. Not that I'm saying that I want someone but
Democrats very much want to be respectable, and that's it. Like, the regular ones anyway. Like, it's this desperation, I think, for respectability and normalcy, and they're like your friend who suddenly decided, like, oh, I'm gonna be a normal person now. I've accepted Jesus Christ as my personal savior or something like that, and I've totally rejected every like, and then they're just like, I'm just gonna really go intensely on this. And I think that Democrats did that because they thought like this is the way to go. They've always been very big on the we want to steal all their best ideas, even if their best ideas are actually terrible ideas.
Just being a respectable face so it's almost like volunteering to be the front company for the mob. So it's like, we're a better way to launder mob money. We'll be respectable. These people are crazy, and obviously mobsters, whereas we can put our suit and tie on. I think Democrats tend to have traditionally tried to do that, starting with the third way. But what's interesting, something that's, when we're talking about the youth vote, was this idea that there's this rejection of the young people. They don't, because again, because they got blamed for these past elections when they were ignored, it's the idea that young people don't come out to vote and that young people are reliable. and we can just ignore them. And the people that matter are, middle-aged white people, or even and
Yeah.
they won't say that overtly, but middle-aged people over 40. And the problem with that, I mentioned this to Jamie last week, is that, well, you might be surprised to know this, but I was actually in my 20s at one point. Like, I'm
Yes.
not fully,
As was I.
I was not born in my mid 40s. So I am a Democratic voter now because over time you invest in these people. If you're just
Mhm.
going to abandon young people, then they will either tune out, never vote, and that won't change. And so it's weird. I've had this argument. It really does seem as if they believe that you could ignore these voters.
Yeah,
Oh,
and then they'll go away, and then they'll vote for you once they are sensible. Like,
yes, and then they'll come
once
back
they come to their senses.
and then they'll start voting for Democrat. And it's like, well, no, either they like Matt Gaetz and people who have a very youthful energy. Even Marjorie Taylor Greene. Marjorie Taylor Greene's my age.
Yeah.
She has a youthful energy in how she engages with young, like, obviously, even compared to, I would say, many Democratic candidates her age who will try to
Yeah.
present differently, like the way she connects with them and whatever. I'm not saying it's good or bad. I'm saying she is doing that. And I feel
Yeah.
like connection with youth, either you wind up with a lot of young people, white, Hispanic, even Black, getting captured by the right, a very violent right, who's pushing this
Mhm.
resentment, pushing this stuff and speaking to them because no one else is. Or you just get people tuned out and it's like, look, forget it. Maybe I'll just try to help people as I can, but I can't help within the system because the system is Joe Manchin. And I
Yeah.
don't want to be
Well, I
part of.
also think, one thing that I do not think helps the Democrats is doing the whole like, well, we can't actually ever do anything. And if you try to get the party to do something, then you're being a spoiled brat and you are a bad idealist person who is going to screw everything up because you're talking about things that we can't get done.
Well,
And I
the
feel like that
party,
very much quashes any like energy that you have as like a young activist. Like
well, it's like,
that's like, oh well,
solve
okay.
your problems, and I won't solve your problems. The only way to solve your problems is to vote and chip away. And one could argue again, the Republicans have captured that sort of youthful urgency. But
Yeah.
even if you were to say that youthful urgency is misguided, you've got to take your time and go the route. You also have to look at, well, where has that paid off that they would buy that? And
Yeah.
you need to like, well, there is urgency now because you're also saying these guys are literally trying to overturn elections or take over our democracy depends on, well, that's a very urgent argument. And if you're
Hmm.
telling us we should be faithful or whatever, so we need to be very consistent. But it's a very fascinating, you know, again, the revulsion of anger. So Republicans reacted to stop the steal, which was not, their reaction to the election was stop the steal. They passed all these voter suppression laws in states that, ironically enough, might not even have to matter. They could literally win legitimately,
Hmm.
if the polling continues. They could win legitimately, but ultimately, it's sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy because what they told their voters is, you feel cheated, I will recognize that, and I will support you and do this. And that makes them feel like, oh, these people are
Yeah.
doing what for me, as opposed to, oh, well, give us more power. Maybe we might do police reform if it doesn't alienate white
Well,
voters.
also there's an
Maybe
attitude that like if you advocate for things that you care about, that you're hurting the party. So like, there's not real they want, that's a really tough thing to overcome if you want young people to vote for you. If you're like, we are going to be sensible and try our best to like maybe get some roads. It doesn't sell because young people are like, hey, I want to do something. I'm really excited about this one thing. And then they're like, well, you're an asshole. Like, don't. And I feel like that just tamps down any kind of, you know,
well,
energy or excitement. And that's not,
yeah.
it's bad advertising. It's bad marketing.
It's bad advertising. I've seen like I don't know if you have as well, the Karen term co-opted by some moderates
Oh,
to
yeah.
refer particularly um even to everyone, but specifically to say women like yourself. So if you advocate for something or why you're not or more, I've had friends who did this online. It's like,
Hmm.
well, I legitimately am confused as to why it's now November. and these people you said are a threat to our democracy tried to overthrow an election, and there's been no arrest or whatever, and it's like, oh, you're calling the manager like a Karen on Merrick Garland, or you want him to, you're treating him like a bad, all this sort of Karen stuff. You're treating him
I
like,
feel like I feel like Karen needs to be over for, at least for white people. Like it did not turn out well. But
no,
go
yeah,
back in the oven,
it seems
you
very
know.
misogynistic. Like, what do you agree with that? Is that sort of putting it back in the oven for a while of like not your
Yeah,
position?
it didn't turn out right. Like, we've got Republicans, trying to use it to their end and everything. And it just, I'm like I was talking earlier, I was to you, sorry, like I was saying to you earlier, I was really like super jazzed when my friend Mike accidentally said fungal. And I was like, this is the greatest day of my life. This is darling. You hang out with me so much that you, a, Chicago Polish guy who has definitely never said that word in his entire life, it just came out. And I was like, oh my God, that is amazing. We are good friends. Um, you know, Picking up things is great, but then you don't just like, I'm going to make it mean this other thing that's terrible. And, white people have a tendency to do that with, like AAVE and everything. And it has woke, it has not turned out well.
No, yeah, I just don't, not that I travel in a lot of Republican circles, but
Yeah.
just from their own actions. And when I have dipped in boards, it is very rare for a mainstream Republican. So your sense of the mainstream Republican to see a board of seeing frustration about the election, like why has this happened, whatever. Those people are spoken to, seen. I've never seen them talk to them as if they're idiots. Not even like the Nancy Paces or the Nikki Haley's. They sort of, people have, how can we dare insult the American voter? Even Josh Hawley was like, who am I to say that my voters, my supporters are wrong? I'm going to overturn an election. And we can say, and I think the Democratic response is no, leadership means doing the right thing. And that's obviously true, but it's also not like a normal voter who doesn't know much, but just only gets emails daily because they donate to Democrats about how our democracy is in peril. And they're like, okay, well, then pass voting rights or get rid of, why aren't these guys who say that they're still, Trump's still president, why are they still in Congress? Why aren't you doing anything? And then to be dismissed, or you make a hashtag, do something Twitter, or treat them like spoiled brats is in any way, like, what's the reaction to that? Because to me,
I don't think that people who are pushing the Democratic Party to do things are hurting it. Like, I don't understand like where the logic for that is. Like, are they like, oh no, if you say the Democratic Party, so I'm having a little trouble talking today. The Democratic Party should do this particular thing that I care about. People are like, oh no, hush, don't say that because you're going to ruin things somehow. Yeah. And like, what is our conservatives going to be like? Well, I was going to vote for that Democrat, but like, they are doing nothing about voting rights for Black people. And well, like, who is that they're afraid is going to be turned off?
I think they view it as a sort of voter suppression. So I was accused of that. So when I said that 2022, based on precedent, was most likely a Democratic loss, and that we should act according to law. So it's not like I'm trying to be Debbie Downer. I'm just saying we need to leave it all on the field. The strategy of like, okay, well, cinema and man. And then of course it was like, well, what would you do to cinema imagine? Which is just like, okay, well, it's fair to say it's like if your doctor came to you and like, well, what can I do? Like I have cancer. What can I do? Well, what would you do, Robyn? It's like, well, you're the doctor. I'm sorry if I'm being a pushy Karen here, but like, help, do something. It's like do something to me as like someone drowning.
Yeah.
Right. And to treat someone drowning, like do something, it's a call of desperation. And if you're responding to your supporters like they're spoiled children when they're desperate, it's like a parent who like their child is starving and is like crying baby, which is literally a baby. No one like shakes, like that's being a horrible person. So generally, these are people who feel desperate, and you're not reacting to that desperation in
Mhm.
any way that is, to me, realistic. And the voter suppression idea is just like if you say that things are bad, but you're running on our democracy at stake, they overturn,
Yeah.
they block voting rights again. Republicans are here. You've got to give us more money. So they raise money on the fact that the wolves are at the door. But if you
Yeah.
recognize the wolves at the door and say, okay, well, maybe that means you should do something right at this moment while we have the power, maybe, arm twist, give us the stuff you said. You said you could work with
Mhm.
Republicans, maybe work with Manchin and Cinema to actively move on this stuff. But if you can't, and instead, like a lot of wishful thinking. So it's the stuff like, oh, well, you don't know that we can't flip Ohio and win the Senate in Ohio and Pennsylvania and whatever. Okay, well, again, that's
Mhm.
outside of what precedent is. And well, how would I know before I give you more money because I already gave money to
Mhm.
Kirsten Cinema that I'm not going to get it on a cinema? Why would
Mhm.
Connor Lamb not be another cinema? Like he already voted against Pelosi for leadership twice to because he believed that was in his interest. Why would he not be someone who would say, I'm going to distinguish myself by bucking the other bad
Yeah.
Democrats? And it's like, well, no, that won't be that way. We'll have room to spare. And so I don't think those questions are being answered. And whenever I raise those, I think there's a sense of why do you attack Democrats? And as I often
Yeah.
say, if I'm in a plane that's hurtling towards the ocean, I will criticize the pilot,
Yeah.
not gravity. I kind of get that gravity is not on my side when I'm in a plane. Like the
Yeah.
gravity isn't opposed to me. I get that Republicans are terrible. Yes, Republicans are bad. So when I say like,
Mhm.
so yes, Republicans are going to rally around a guy who literally tried to, um, uh, raise an ad or he murdered his colleague Alexandra Ocasio Cortez. What I expect from Democrats is that they will make that very unpleasant for them, just like Republicans did when people dared to, not feed Sarah Huckabee Sanders. Like
Yeah.
every Republican stopped what they were doing and went after, made it a wedge issue, asked like, so that every Democrat was asked, do you think that Sarah Huckabee Sanders should be allowed to eat? Like make,
Yeah.
whatever. So yes, I do hold it to Democrats to do the same thing. Don't release just one statement, run on these people are horrible to women or whatever, because
Yeah.
you're the ones in charge.
You have to hammer everything. And quite frankly, no, I don't think that Sarah Huckabee Sanders should be allowed to eat anything. I'm kidding, no. But like,
Yes, you're
the,
not body shaming.
I
It's
will
just
say the
not.
only way to handle a question like that is say, no, absolutely not. She has to starve. This is the only way. And like people, I feel like they take things way too seriously that are obvious trolls. I wrote earlier this week the whole Kathy Griffin thing, speaking of CNN, and my continued arch nemesis, Anderson Cooper. Um, like, why was everyone pretending like they were actually offended? They were not offended. They're not offended by anything other than Black people voting, frankly. Like that's where they're upset, or like children learning about racism.
Well,
That those are things they're genuinely offended by. They are not offended by bloody heads in any capacity.
oh yeah, so there was a whole bunch of that. Like again, so you're starting with that, right? So then it was like,
Mhm.
oh, they did Julius Caesar, where it was
Yeah.
clearly Caesar was Donald Trump, like he was in a
Yeah.
suit like
Which
Trump.
they've done for every single president.
Oh yes,
That's like being like, oh man, a high school did a production of Romeo and Juliet where they were in modern times.
yes.
Crazy.
And so then that was something that oh, this is terrible, civility, civility. And then of course, whenever you're like, well, maybe a comedian shouldn't say terrible things about trans people, or maybe
Yeah.
uh, a politician shouldn't like misgender trans people, like Paul, like Rand Paul has done, and others. Then it's like, oh, cancel culture. And then now it's suddenly like, we're going to, wait a minute, now you're burning books. Like, this is a party that started about cancel culture. How dare you put warning labels for the Muppets? And then 8 months later, they're banning books and winning on that. And so to me, it's like, they're to be able to be like, no, they're all full of crap. They are, all they care about is, you're saying, power, right? Like, that's all it is.
They don't play the key, I think, is to not play the game. And I know that some people are very big on rules and whatnot, but the only way you win the game is to not play the game and to not do, like, oh my gosh, I am sorry about this thing that they are clearly disingenuously mad about.
I've seen people even try to make sense of the Republicans in a weird, like, Democrats are obsessed. Some Democrats are obsessed with that, of like, oh, well, maybe this is why this is different, and maybe why they got upset about Kathy Griffin and they're not upset about AOC was this and that. It's like, why are you trying to make, one, sense of them?
Yeah.
Because they don't
and they
make
also right out
with that.
They said,
like,
well,
horrible people.
One of the people in my mentions, I don't know why I'm having such trouble talking. I'm sorry. But like, one of the people in my mentions was like, well, we were offended, but then you all spent 4 years destroying Donald Trump and being mean to him. And so now we don't care. And they do that with like a lot. It was exactly almost what Lindsey Graham said about voting for Barrett, Coney Barrett. Like, that was his exact reasoning. And like, they're like, this is our message, we're sticking to it. You are all the ones who you're the ones who changed the rules. And Democrats are not willing to say, oh no, you guys changed the rules. Kamala Harris is allowed to speak however she goddamn wants to.
And
like,
go back to that point,
oh no, they're gonna think we're weird.
That's you make such a great point on that, because it is a human instinct. And I feel like everyone's like, well, that's so blatantly unfair according to subsection 5 of this, as if there's a contract. Like, they had actually, and I've always said at the time, when Merrick, when he blocked that seat, they stole it from you. Like, no one, like, if you let someone steal your car and you go over to their house 3 years later and try to take their car, it's like, well, wait a minute, you stole my car and you said that you could steal cars on a Tuesday in October. They'd be like, well, yeah, that's probably a lie. I'm not gonna let you steal my car now. What's wrong with you?
Yeah.
Like, it's so they really believed that there was some sort of ethical premise, and they were then allowed to go to something that is more emotional and makes sense, which is, well, F them. Look what they did to Trump. This is why look what they tried to do to the noble, attempted rapist, Brett Kavanaugh. We almost destroyed him, so that this is justified. And that's a human instinct. And that instinct is brewing within Democratic voters. But yet the Democratic establishment won't let that be reviewed. That the idea that, like, and instead, I mean, we get from the Never Trumpers and even like, centrists like Carville and others, of like, that instinct is wrong. The idea that 2015 should have been the end of everything, of 2016. Like, you elected this racist monster who terrorized women and minorities. We're done with you, because he would have lost. Trump would have lost only his most devoted followers. And if Hillary Clinton was wrong about deplorables, then he would have lost in a landslide. That didn't happen. And now you're telling me that nominating Elizabeth Warren means that we get a 49 state, we get Mondale if Warren or Sanders is on the ticket. But when Trump, who's incompetent, who's a racist, white people are like, okay, fine. Republicans are like, okay, we're still going to turn out for him. So like, instead of that being like, this is who you people are, or we're not engaging with you in the same way, they're like, no, nothing's changed. And even now, so Republicans are the one who acts as if Democrats committed a constitutional crisis after the election, because Democrats aren't acting that way. They're kind of investigating something behind the scenes, and maybe I'm being a Karen by suggesting it's not catching fire. But essentially, what Mitch McConnell has maneuvered these guys into is that Democrats next year are going to be running on the fact that Republicans are, you've got to vote for us. This is desperate. Defy all precedents, because these guys, it's like their democracy will end. Okay, Well, what have you done for us? What's your core legislative achievement?
Yeah,
Oh, I'm building roads with the fascists, huh?
yeah.
I'm can Are they fascists? Or are they road builders? Well, they're fascists, but they do think that we should, maybe do some roads. They're not. That doesn't sound like they're very bad fascists. It's like
Well,
a
I
not
think,
the best message.
yeah. I think in general, and I say this a lot, but like in American society, it is the norm to to bow right and punch left. So like Republicans, they're the people who are sort of in the middle of Republicans, whatever, not in the middle of them, but like centrist Republicans, whatever you want to call it. Um, they're always trying to appease their base. Middle of the road Democrats are always trying to appease Republicans, like moderate Republicans, and then the left is off not caring about any of that because we're assholes, I guess. But it's like it's a certain thing where it's like you have to. I feel like people sort of get in the habit of certain things, and I feel like they sort of have to pay this like toll of all Republicans are not bad. There are some good ones and we can work with them, and I'm good because I'm a Democrat who can work with those Republicans
Mhm.
who are going to murder democracy. And I feel like it's a really tough line to
Well, it's a bad
hold.
message. It's just like, I mean, white moderate white moderates might like seeing Kirsten Sinema, especially in a very traditional gender role with
Mhm.
Ronnie as Ted Lasso. That does not help Democrats, and something we touched on last week.
But
Jamie and
it
I,
does help
like,
Republicans, or it helps
yeah,
Mitt Romney.
the you know, I got a lot of heat for saying, like, what are you doing, Pelosi? Why would you say we need a strong Republican Party? We
Mhm.
already have Manchin. We've got enough problems. We don't need a strong Republican Party. And I said, oh well, no, that's what you have to tell them, because we can't lie to young people and motivate them, but we have to lie to middle class white people and pretend that these people, their friends, aren't fascists and everything, and that
Yeah.
everything's still nice. It's nice, still nice. 1985 outside. And even then, Republicans were
I was
terrible.
going to say
We're
Republicans were terrible in 1985.
going to
I
deny
don't.
reality in general. But
I was a
what
toddler, but I thought that Oliver North's middle name was fucking. So, um,
but like what you get from a strong Republican Party is getting your butt kicked in Virginia and hanging
yeah,
on um
because this is like,
in
stop
New
paying
Jersey.
this toll, stop paying this like fealty or whatever to these people because they're not going to be paying it back. It doesn't work the way that you think it does. Like, I don't know how else to say it. And again, if you want to be remembered, you can't just be super freaking normal and bland. Like, I cannot picture what Abigail Spanberger looks like. I will never retain her face in my head. It will
Yeah.
not happen. And that is because she is so incredibly like boring that I mean, it just does not stay in my head.
And
Um,
she's not on, the in what way. It's very clear she makes a point of like stating she's not interested in my issue. So,
yeah.
my concerns from police violence, or the fact that her base, you need 90% of Black people, you need them to jump through literally hoops of fire, because that's going to be in some of those voting rights bills, the literally loops through hoops of fire to vote for you in epic numbers, but it's embarrassing to you. And you're going to instead have a ritualistic ass kissing of cops if they're like, please do something, you know, do
Yeah.
something that they will stop
Murdering people.
murdering. Because it's not an accident. You're going to have to
Yeah.
choose a side. This stuff is, you have to kind of say, these are bad acts. These are bad actors. We need to do something.
Yeah.
And they will go to the point of where, oh, Republicans are they will defend us only to the point that Republicans will let them.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
Republicans are kind of like, no, no, we still think they should be allowed to kill. We still think Derek Chauvin should be to do that. Then they sort of pull back. But initially their statements are with the presumption that they're good, loyal, nice Republicans are going to be, well,
Mhm.
certainly. I'm sure, oh yeah, they love cops, but surely strangling, that's wrong. Or surely like, torturing women and chasing them to, and doing a fugitive slave act thing with them in Texas is wrong. Maybe they'll support that and I can come back. But instead they don't. Republicans never do, and they will never
Yeah.
go out on that ledge for us. So that's where Spamberger is. Like,
Well,
I
it's
like
like,
to read.
I feel like they're just jumping through hoops to figure out like which porridge is like the correct temperature. Like it's like, at first it was, oh, we're bad for wanting economic things to happen so that people aren't starving. And then it's like, oh no, Black people are gonna make us all be too woke. Whereas like what is it that they want? I feel like you have to just be yourself. Like you can't run by I don't think that like if you run by committee and like what you feel is like popular at the time. Sorry, I'm really having trouble talking, but like
No, no, no.
it's
I
like,
totally get that. It's like not being authentic to yourself or to anything because
yeah.
authentic.
Well, it's
I
like
think
what was the thing with television where it was like least controversial show or something like that, where like they would put a certain show that was like maybe not great but not going to piss that many people off at like prime time in like the 70s. I don't know. I was reading about it recently. But like I feel like a lot of Democrats are sort of trying to be that.
oh yeah.
And when you try to be everything to everyone, most people are like, I don't
As someone who grew up from
care.
the
Like,
80s, and as someone who's grew up from the 80s, it feels as if we're moving in a shift, especially with this embrace of never Trumpers, where a lot of the centrist Dems are starting to sound like Republicans, like the good Republicans in the 80s
mhm,
TV show.
yeah.
And meanwhile, the Republicans are starting to sound like the roll up the sleeves, bar manager, working class Joe. They really sort of took what they could from Trump, Sanders, that rhetoric, and
Hmm.
it's to bury a lot of. So this guy in Pennsylvania, Dave White, who's I wrote about last week, is sort of on the Young King track of like, together we can put this Commonwealth back on the right track. The day when the working men and women, parents, seniors, veterans, teachers, doctors, farmers, the blue collar workers, and the white collar workers. This is the day we all stand for and demand results. He's talking about, you know, um, more freedom and increased parental involvement. And it's clear what he means by that, like the coded terminology,
Hmm.
but it's conveyed in such a way that then Democrats wind up behind an eight ball of like saying, well, no, that's racist. Well, what's racist about more parent involvement in schools or whatever? And I think a lot of our rhetoric, to the extent that I will kind of entertain the anti woke arguments, but I do, because some of it's not being identified, but a lot of it seems to come from a very academic place, headspace,
Hmm.
and it feels like it's focus grouped, and it feels like something that is easily. I mean, again, Republicans don't really have anything called critical race theory. When they talk, that's a reason they call it
You know
pro-life
what
or
critical
pro
race
whatever.
theory is?
Yeah, they don't have anything. Well, they don't have anything that sounds like critical race theory sounds like an album title or a movie title. For a movie, that it sounds like, oh, we want to see critical race theory, and it sounds like, oh, that must be an action adventure. There's critical, and there's like it reads as something
Hmm.
serious instead of like, school choice, the movie. You're like, okay, well, that's gonna be normal and whatever. That's like, no, no, no,
Yeah,
that's about like they're gonna burn all books or whatever.
yeah,
What, really? Like, right to life. Oh, I'm for that. Like a lot of things, like if you saw this, I would say,
yeah,
I support this, I support this. And something on that, it'd be like, oh, what does that mean? That's a little scary. And
yeah,
I think that's part of the language that is becoming a challenge. And to the extent that I would say, don't be woke, I would be like,
yeah.
well, maybe we need to
No, I
not
do think that people need in general to explain things in very simplistic terms. I think that when you start getting complicated, you lose people just in general. And most of these concepts are so simple and so basic that people, I do think, on some level understand them, like just intrinsically. And if we, talk about them like, hey, this is just like a good way to be to other people, um, instead of, let's explain this with complicated words and blah, blah, blah. I think there are a lot of messages that are very saleable. It's just not saleable the way that people are, selling them. No, I'm not talking about like the activists. I'm talking about like the politicians who are like, I half understand this, but I'm going to make it sound really complicated. So, because I don't actually understand it,
And, to sort of.
And if you don't know what I'm talking about, you're not smart enough. Like,
well, and you've touched on this, and you just sort of, as you say, it's kind of like, it's just how this game is played and it's whatever. But what's fascinating to me is that when Spamberger or Carville and centrists will talk about, we everyone's too woke, they stopped talking the wokeness or whatever. It's like, well, it just felt like 5 years ago wasn't the big heresy that Sanders committed, and even Warren was accused of this, of not being intersectional, of only focusing on on not, saying identity politics. Let's not focus on that. Let's economic issues can help everyone, and that was deemed as the worst thing ever. Often a lot of potential K-hivers and whatever attack them for that, specifically saying it's, you're racist or you're sexist. And then now it's like, oh, well, that's all too woke. Like, well, it's like the Goldilocks thing. Well, what is the Democratic position? And it can't just be whatever.
Well, I think that like the people in charge thought it was going to be like a really good way to go for everyone to be like, okay, we don't like, for like the message to be, let's not actually do anything until racism and sexism are solved. And then we can maybe talk about economic things, but probably not even then. And I think that was like a good way of like, trying to lower people's expectations. Because it was like, we can just tell people, we'll have a president who says, hey, stop being racist. That's bad. And then people will be like, wow, I totally get it now. And that was sort of what they thought was gonna like protect them from anything too radical happening, frankly. Yeah. And what happened was, because like it used to be that like, a lot of the people who were, sort of very Clinton-y and in that way where it was like, I'm very pro-Clinton and like, oh no, any economic stuff is bad, which became a thing for a minute. Like I was very much told like by some of my very good friends, it was like, no, if you even talk about the economy, you are a terrible human being because we're not doing that right now. And I was like, fine, whatever. I am no longer invested in this. But because at that time, that was like a thing people were going to have to do something about rather than just talk and say pleasant, nice words. And now what happened with like, the police and everything and defund the police and like all this other stuff is like, oh, and the like voting rights. Oh, wait, people actually want us to do stuff instead of talking pretty about this too. And that's totally like, so now that has to go also. We just want the nice words and then everyone's happy.
Yeah.
Like, I think that's
really it's, to tie everything into musical theater as I do. I was talking to a colleague of mine about this, and theater has a challenge of when Chicago came out 25 years ago today, one of the best musicals ever. It was very stripped down sets, stripped down outfits. It's timeless. We don't need to have Velma Kelly in a flapper outfit or whatever. And people took from that of like, instead of being, oh, we can do a strip down and go to what is the core of this. Well, let's just sell sex and still spend a lot of money. Okay, well, that's not quite what they were doing. And then with Hamilton, it was like, oh, here's how children are really excited about this musical. It's modern and it's embracing the modern and pop culture and whatever. And it was still like, yeah, we kind of don't want to do that. We want to do Hamilton without doing that because that's like too different. And so it's the reason I mentioned that it feels like whatever instance, everything that came from Sanders or that could have been a positive. We could have said, okay, we don't like this guy, but let's steal liberally from him. Let's do because that's what white folks had no problem doing to black people in the 50s or whatever. Like, we don't like these guys, but hey, that could sell. Let's throw it on a white guy and sell some records and call it rock and roll. Like they had no problem doing this. And yeah, exactly. It's like, well, Pat Boone it a little or something. because that's what Republicans have
Yeah.
done. And so now they really present more authentically as this blue collar party. And Democrats are still trying to chase, again, partly because I think of the never Trumpers. And they feel such
Yeah.
pride that they have the Jennifer Rubins or the Amanda Carpenters and all of these sort of the suburban, they have that
It's
group.
like getting the approval of your, high school prom queen 20 years too late. I think
Exactly.
like if that's still like the kind of thing that is important to you, I think like that sort of
And they got their butts beaten. Like these are people, they're the
yeah,
Washington generals of politics. You could not stop Trump. Like
yeah.
every one of these has a vote of like they were unable to stop Trump when it mattered. And now
Mhm.
it's like, oh, well, we need to listen. And how much money can we give these folks to write for the Atlantic or USA Today or put on
Yeah,
a whole TV show to get their feedback, even though they could not stop what happened to the Republican Party. They were
yeah.
defeated by Marjorie Taylor Greene. And so,
Mhm.
you know, I don't know. I mean, to see when I see Connor Lamb get pushed, who was like, and I will dare raise the argument of like, well, how do you expect him to turn out the black vote? And he represents this one.
Yeah.
Oh, he will. And it's like, okay, fine. Black people know what's at stake. All right. I mean, okay. Like, I mean, it's like really you have to back away because it's such a
Yeah.
big.
No, people are very intense. Like people who love Connor Lamb are really intense, and I do not mess with them. Like
Yeah.
that is they are free to just. I'm not touching that, honestly.
And
Like
yeah, it's like they've decided that the reason they've lost elections is because of wokeness, is because of anything. So anyone who looks like AOC is the problem. That's the
yeah.
issue. And Connor Lamb, like the crisp shirt politician who rolls up his sleeves for the meet and greet, he looks clean cut,
Mhm.
and that's presentable. That's the best way to win, despite what Matt Getz is doing, despite whatever these
Yeah.
folks are doing. I mean, you turn the TV off, if you turn the sound off, you hate to say this, we turn the sound off. And again, from a 1980s perspective, who would you think looks more like, or who is an
Oh yeah.
animated, who looks more
No,
like
they kind of
Democrats?
do like
Matt Getz.
the Alex P. Keaton thing. Well, okay. If anyone gets too animated, they'll think they're like a little too ethnic.
Mhm.
They're like, no, we must be very like, oh no, you're too ethnic. You could be a socialist.
Exactly. And Marjorie Taylor
Like,
Greene and Lauren Boebert
yeah.
are like, and our versions because they're inconvenient women. So like Cori
Yeah.
Bush, single mom who's homeless, and Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar, the working class. But instead we want the PTA moms, and I don't mean it's
Mhm.
derisively, but it's like, well, those it's such a shaky coalition. They've proven again and again this coalition of the spam burgers, and obviously she's a Democrat, but people
Yeah.
like her will
They're
believe
a
that somehow
really small segment of the population at this point.
they
Like,
flipped in
yeah.
Virginia. They flipped. They're a very shaky coalition.
Yeah.
So we went in 20. You were so happy in 2020 to get a coalition of people who will turn on you over lies,
Mhm.
over someone, over
Yeah.
Toni Morrison or whatever. They're just looking, and frankly, they were looking for an excuse to be cynical.
Mhm.
They're just looking for an excuse to turn on Democrats, and they needed a culture war issue. Republicans fed it to
Oh
them,
yeah.
and those
But
moms
like
got.
the right literally goes searching in like, academia for a thing to be mad about. Like they're like, we got nothing to be mad about. We're gonna find a thing and we're gonna be so pissed about it. We're gonna have parents at school things yelling about it. And they do that. They, just keep hammering the same thing over and over again. Like, same thing with the accent thing. Like they're just like, we're gonna take a thing that is fairly non-controversial and just really
And
try and make it controversial. And because we keep talking about it, people will be like, oh wow, people wouldn't be talking about it so much if it wasn't like really bad.
And it's so fascinating to me because, and one of the users in Vario had mentioned about Fetterman and Kenyatta. And again, for whatever, again, a lot of specifically young Democrats of color are
Mm-hmm.
potentially very are inconvenient because they're in the left or they're
Mhm.
so they're not acceptable, but the party of minorities are still going against the the suburbanite types. And in Fetterman, it's a very interesting thing where it's clear his original sin is apparently being this Bernie bro, which is fine. You don't have to
Mhm.
support Fetterman, but then there's this whole thing of where, and Rebecca and I had discussed this. I'd written about where his whole case of where he pulled a gun on a black jogger. Again, a
Yeah,
guy who was later arrested for an unrelated crime, but were later arrested, who actually
yeah.
has no bone to pick with him. But now it's very important that, again, Lamb supporters are painting Fetterman, who actually was reelected in a predominantly black area in a group,
Mhm.
painting him as the racist candidate, the bad candidate, the one who won't turn out the black vote. And as a very deliberate, and that could be totally true, but it's
Mhm.
clear what this issue is with him. And again, it's like, you know, we're getting this argument of we need an anti-woke, we need to be pro-police, we need to be anti-crime, but of course, when convenient, we're going to be very woke. He put a gun on a black
Yeah.
person, and we're going to be anti-gun, even
In
though
words only, in nothing that involves actually passing any laws or doing anything. We will
yes,
come out and say, we think Black people are wonderful. And then people will be like, oh, good job not being racist. And they will say, thank you. And that's what, like, that's really like the extent
that's
of
the
what they're
total.
looking to do here.
And look, and I get that. It's just this weird sense of I don't know what will break that sense of like to the extent that there are a lot of people who wish Bernie Sanders had never run for president, there's only part of me that wishes he hadn't, only in the sense that if that had caused in any way this sort of refusal to ever embrace any sort of populism or oppression, any
No,
whatever, because to me it's like we're just going off a cliff of chasing a suburban voter and not trying to be the true rural working class party or
there
any
is
way.
no one who is a good enough person or perfect or enough to like go out there and be like, hey, what if people weren't starving to death and could go to the doctor? Like there's no person who is like humanly perfect enough to do that without being freaking destroyed. Like there's no one. Like it's not like, oh, Bernie had a like it's not an imperfect messenger situation. Like you could go out there looking like Connor Lamb and, you start saying radical, sort of like more radical shit like, hey, what if we did some stuff? And people are going to be like, oh my God, did you hear the inflection in his voice? Or, oh my God, there's just something about like this Abigail Spanberger's voice that like goes up my spine and it bothers me. Um, like the second that they started pushing for something, people would be going after them, like no matter how innocuous they were otherwise.
Mhm.
That's really it.
Yeah, um, it's unfortunate because I feel like there was I think that we're being beaten in a messaging battle, um, and a sort of a communication of a message, and sort of an urgency, and we're sort of missing kind of the grassroots. We're surrendering the
Yeah.
grassroots to Marjorie Taylor Greene, Lauren Boebert. They are Matt Gaetz. They're like kind of presenting that they're being welcomed with
Mhm.
open arms, and it's not necessarily what's happening within the Democratic Party. And I don't know how that fixes it. And again, I think the lessons from Virginia and Pennsylvania and New Jersey will unfortunately kind of go in the wrong direction. They won't go,
Yeah.
so um what do you have going on for next week for this, for what seems interesting to you?
Honestly, I don't know yet. Like really, I have not figured anything out. I'm, you know, still kind of out of it, frankly. Like,
Totally
so
understandable. I'm sure something will pop, and there will
yeah,
be.
I'll figure some shit out. And how about you?
Yeah, I think that also there was Jenna Ellis had written a memo during the sort of when overturning the election, which was pressuring Pence. And then I think one of the advisors has suggested that Pence could, flip the election because Jefferson had done something as vice president
Yeah,
that's similar, which was not because they don't really get history or
yeah.
situations or whatever. So it's an excuse to discuss history and link to the Hamilton musical. But it's yeah, I mean, none of the bad, Jenna Ellis should never work again in the law and she'd been disbarred immediately, but there's no kind of, she will face no long-term repercussions. And a lot of these folks might come back if, and soon the idea,
We
go ahead,
we
I'm
gotta
sorry.
stop worrying about people facing repercussions. Like really, like just fucking go and do our own shit. Stop worrying like, oh no, they didn't get punished. Because like it's probably never gonna happen.
Yes, I agree. I think my hope is that we will sort of see some, either with Bannon or with others. Though I think I saw that Lauren Boebert is threatening reprisal for politically motivated, essentially that you know once Republicans are in control, they will just pretty much make life hell for Democrats more so than usual. It's very hard to say how they would be
Yeah.
worse. But, we will certainly see. If there's any sort of consolation, it's probably that Kevin McCarthy will be ritualistically consumed, and probably Marjorie Taylor Greene will be, or Matt Gaetz, or someone will be Speaker of the House, which is, kind of,
Oh.
sort of fun to think that McCarthy will lose everything, but also depressing to think of who would defeat him. So, but thank you for a great chat as always, Robyn,
And
and
thank you.
I
It
missed
is
you.
lovely to see your face again after
Yes.
2 weeks. So
Thank you everyone for tuning in. We'll see you guys next week.
next week. Oh, my hand isn't even